All right, just real quick, we might get a little more in depth on like the condenser microphones, but on this one, that just to give an example, like the Shure SM58, that one of the things I suggest you go back and watch this series I did on learning actual audio engineering, and it'll give you a bunch of tools to experiment around on, even if you're not an audio engineer, to get a little bit better understanding of hardware components. Because the other part that we need to really look at is, what inside of this, how's this inside the internal wiring, how is that, other than just the transducer, how is that affecting, all these things that we've talked about? And basically, without being an audio engineer, that might be kind of hard to determine, because even something simple as a low-pass filter, I'd suggest you, Google it, wiring a low-pass filter. Even something simple as that and the different ways that that can be done, that there can be some very complex issues happening there. Without really getting in depth into audio engineering, you might not understand what's happening there. So we're going to kind of not go there too much, because we had talked about that a little bit when we were looking at that AKG microphone. That without the understanding of audio engineering, it's going to be really hard for you to evaluate what's happening there. So, what you can do, the first thing you can do is ask what it does. That means directly email the manufacturer when you're thinking about that microphone and you've looked at the transducer and the specs and everything else, and you've having some other issues, to actually email them or the distributor and say, how is the inner wiring affecting this specification that you've given me? What in there is causing that? Sometimes that you can actually, pull it apart and rewire things. But, even other than that, it gives you a better idea of what might be different in another microphone, that they might have done some other type of wiring that, in the actual configuration in the diagram, and the components that are making it better with you having a better understanding. And most times they're going to kind of want you to understand that to some point. You might run into the same problem, and are probably going to run into the same problem we ran into with the transducer, but without giving you specific information about what exactly they used, they can probably give you a pretty good understanding of, why that how that wiring diagram is affecting any of the issues that we've talked about. And, so that you can look at another microphone and the entire internal wiring and ask them the same question and go, well, it's because they did that with the wiring, and so I'm getting a better frequency response, or this, that, or the other thing, and that's a huge tool. Because just like this one, this SM58, this is what we get here. And without you understanding, even this transformer, what is it actually doing? What's it doing? It's inverting the signal, right? So that it's an upside down of the other one, because it can boost the signal. So, but without you understanding those components, to really understand what's happening, what you want to understand is what it might be, how it might be affecting those specifications. So that you can look at different ones and say, well, they've did some other stuff here, and I emailed the manufacturer, I talked to the distributor, and Bob's really cool, and he's told me, the guy that fixes microphones, a microphone repair shop, to maybe tell you what that might be. And it's also a real good idea to dig around on the internet, because you can dig around on the internet and some of this stuff might be real easy for you to understand, and sometimes it's not. Sometimes you're going to pull up a wiring diagram and go, well, what is that? Without you having some understanding of audio engineering, I pull up things all the time and I'll be looking at it and going, whoa, how did he configure that? Because, a lot of times wiring can be, and audio engineering can be very basic components, but, it's all about how they configure them to do different things. It can be the problem, because if you don't understand exactly what's happening, what they're trying to do, and what type of configuration, that you can get absolutely nowhere really quick and come away really frustrated when you might have seen something really cool, that you go back, look at those wiring diagrams, and then ask them direct questions about how their wiring inside their mic, other than a transducer, has done that to the sound and affected those specifications. Because other than that you're really going to be looking at, even the wiring diagram, it might not just be all just the wiring diagram itself. So it's really hard to analyze it, just like the transducer, that Bob here has wired it just like this. Well, Timmy wired it the exact same way, but he used different components. He used better materials. He used different capacitors, transformers, op amps, he used, better materials, and he had configured maybe in a different way with better materials. So how are you going to get with that? You're really not. So, I mean, we come to the same problem we had with the transducer. But you can always go and ask them, because if you can't really get those specific tolerances, specifications, and information on the materials that they were used, that's probably a trade secret. Some of it they'd be happy to give you the diagram and you can get information there. But to understand, that's the wall that you'll come into. Sometimes it can be real easy that, Bob put this high pass, low pass filter on a band pass filter. He put this filter on there to boost this or do that or compensate for that, and it's, explainable. Sometimes it's not. Sometimes you'll be looking at it and without some real direct answers of what's going on there, that it's really going to be hard for you to base any conclusions on that. You're just going to have a wiring diagram that you don't have enough information to base a solid concrete decision on what that's doing and how that's better than Bob's microphone, because you don't know that it is. Does that make sense? So without making a real long video on this, that basically look at the manufacturer and they'll give you some information. You can get some information from the actual user guide, and you can get some information on the internet about different wiring diagrams, and you can also get on there and get different information from individuals. But be real careful there, because Timmy, Jimmy, and Bob, two of them really know what they're talking about, and one of them is totally clueless. And he's a nice guy like me, but he doesn't have any understanding what's going on. And that can happen. There's been a lot of times in my learning process that I'll be running into things and I'll be like, well, Bob told me, and it's like, well, Bob didn't have a clue. And I'll be like, you mean for 6 months I've been thinking that's the way things operate and Bob was clueless? Yep. So you got to be real careful about that. So the best thing to do is get 3 or 4 opinions on anything on this channel, any channel. Double check the information you get to make sure that you're not, getting led off out into the pasture somewhere with no comprehension of what's really actually happening. But anyway, I hope I addressed that in a way that, it's another one of the things that we run into, just like the transducer. But at least with that understanding that, you've got a couple different, things that you can go to. On this channel here, if you go back and watch this thing on learning audio engineering, I gave you some really cool tools. There's even a cool tool here that you can build, you can build circuitry and actually run it to build effects, like stop boxes or anything. So you can configure a whole bunch of different things, and simple microphone diagrams are, will be very easy to replicate. And you can actually run your microphone through them and build your own system that compensates for the microphone that you have. It's just like, and you have to look at it, but you go in there, there's a tool in there to do some really cool things. And there's a bunch of other tools that I pointed out. So I just kind of wanted to address that really quick and how to address that. And I didn't mean to put a roadblock up there, but the problem is that you're going to run into some of the same things with the transducers. Some of the simple concepts can be very easy for you to get answers for and to understand, but sometimes components, configurations, and things like that can have a huge difference, and it's not real obvious from looking at the diagram. So you basically have to go back to the specifications and then ask, okay, I know this transducer, I understand it. I understand, you were trying to get that to go through this. What did you do in the wiring? How is that affecting the sound? What did you do in the sound? And I know that sounds like a lot, but that's how you're going to get those answers. It's because you're not going to get the materials. The configuration you can get somewhat, but the materials and, how that's different than Bob's, it's going to be hard for you to determine that. So, I mean, basic, configurations are easy to understand, but that you might end up in the same thing that you dealing with the transducer, that you just can't get the information you need to have a good solid understanding of what the difference is between Bob's wiring diagram and Timmy's wiring diagram when they look just about the same. Or if Bob did something a little bit different, but it really isn't better because he used garbage materials, he didn't do it very well. And so you're much better off with the other one that looks much simpler, but it looks like Bob did a whole bunch of stuff to his that really isn't better. So you really got to go back to the manufacturer, look at those specifications, And then ask, ask, how's that affecting the sound? How's that affecting your specifications? What were you trying to do in the wiring diagram? That's different than Bob's. What were you trying to do different? The specs are a little bit different. How did that affect it? And to go through every one of them would be ridiculous, but that's a good way to approach it. And, that other thing that we've talked about is, when we look at building a microphone, then we're going to get a little bit better understanding of that. So I do suggest on that area, the first tool I'm telling you is go back and look at that thing I did on audio engineering, and there's some tools for you to play with some of those components and get some better understandings of what's happening there. And ask, ask. You can ask questions. Just be careful that you're not asking a bunch of people that don't understand what they're doing, because not everybody is an audio engineer, and most people messing with any of that stuff have some understanding of what's happening there, but there can be a huge gap. Does that make sense? And you can run into problems if you're basing your conclusion on what Bob told you, but Bob is not an audio engineer, but Randy is. Does that make sense? So, be real careful about that. But if you look at 2 or 3, you get 2 or 3 opinions on it, you should be pretty well to go. And like I said, that sounds like a lot, but I kind of want to address the wiring diagram. And sometimes in a dynamic microphone like this one, it can be real simple. I mean, there is nothing to this. Sometimes they start trying to do stuff that they think is cool, or it might improve the sound, or it might do this, or it might do that, or the other thing, and they're trying to mess with the issues you're having in the specifications by doing different types of wiring. You can end up looking at something that you have no clue what you're looking at without really doing some research and understanding audio engineering. So don't get frustrated there. If you're looking at a bunch of capacitors or resistors and things like that, and you're going, well, what is that going to mean? And Bob's stuff looks just like Timmy's stuff, but obviously Bob's shit doesn't look, on the spec sheet, doesn't look anything like Timmy's stuff. So what's happening there? Components and configurations and a better understanding of audio engineering. So, I hope that that was kind of, I'm trying to give you direction in this video on that without really addressing it too deep, because it really can be very specific to what's happening, and to get into that, we'll get into audio engineering. So again, what do we have to work with? Just like when we talked to about the transducers, we have one more tool other than what we talked about with the transducers, and that was those videos that I was showing you on learning audio engineering. And you can go back there and get some understanding of what's happening there, a better understanding. And after you get done watching that, you probably have some direct questions that you can ask some actual audio engineers, or some direct questions that you can ask the manufacturer and say, well, I know, why did you put that capacitor there with that, and what is that doing? Because it looks to me like, it's a low-pass filter or some damn thing, but it doesn't seem to be acting like that. You may or may not get anywhere with the manufacturer on that. Does that make sense? So, and that's going to depend on who you're talking to. So I just kind of wanted to address that really quick, so that you understand that I wasn't forgetting about that, but that can be a lot like the transducer, and we're trying to go back like we did with transducers and deal with the information we do have. But to take a look at it, no doubt, and if there's something that doesn't look right or looks different than Jimmy's or Bob's or something like that, we're seeing it with our eyes, and we can go back and compare and say, well, ask the manufacturer what is going on there, and ask the distributor, and ask those people like that. Look at it yourself. What are those configures doing if you got some understanding of what's happening there. Without an understanding of what's going on there, it's unlikely you're going to understand what it's doing in any way, shape, or form. But they might be able to put it in a way to you that you can understand it in layman's terms without a lot of math and understanding audio engineering of what they're trying to do. And then you can look at the spec sheet for yourself to see if they did a very good job of it. Does that make sense? So I hope that was good. We got one more video before we go on to dynamic, or to condenser microphones. So I hope you enjoyed learning about the transducer of the dynamic microphone. And there's one more video on that kind of about like this. So peace, hope, love. See you in the next video.